world's biggest airports have the necessary 3 kilometres of runway to accommodate the mighty 707. But back in the 1960s, most runways were under half that length. As a result, a whopping 20 years after jets first flew, the vast majority of flights were still being made in props. For passengers, this meant slow, bumpy journeys at Iron Maiden noise levels. For jet designers, opportunity knocked. What was needed, frankly, was something a bit more nippy, something that could scoot in and out of places that the American 707 couldn't get in and out of. Like the Cadillac, the 707 was great for long distance, but less than ideal for nipping to the shops and back. What was needed was something, well, frankly, a bit more European. Something, in other words, a bit like this. And the British thought they had the solution. OK, so the 707 was a better plane than their Comet. But the Brits wouldn't quit. They'd given their egos a dusting down and come up with something radically innovative to re-energise the British aviation industry. The Hawker Siddeley Trident. A 3-engined airliner with all 3 engines on the tail. Really quite revolutionary. And the thinking behind putting the engines on the tail was that it was a much cleaner airframe because you didn't have these great big pods dangling in the wind. So the idea was it was more efficient, it would save fuel, it would be sleeker, and indeed with the extra power of the 3 engines, it would whiz you in and out of smaller airfields, which hitherto had been unable to get a jet service. On paper, the Trident had the world at its wings. But by the time it came off the assembly line, it would be hamstrung by one of the most stupid decisions in British aviation history. In the early 1960s, the world was waiting for many wonderful things to be invented. Viagra, Prozac for cats, VHS video, heavy metal music. The jet age had arrived, but so far only in places that could accommodate big, lumbering planes like the 707. The industry was desperate for a jet that could take off and land from short runways. In 1962, a new British plane took to the skies, the Trident. It was the great hope for the UK's aviation industry, and Tony Angus flew it in its heyday.
There were so many things on it which were revolutionary, for want of a better word, that none of us, I don't think, ever got bored with the aeroplane. I don't ever remember a pilot saying, I got bored with that aeroplane, because it was so versatile.
So as a pilot, what was it like to fly?
Very good. It had this rather revolutionary control column. If you notice, it's hinged at the middle there. Right. So it was known as a ram's horn. Once you got used to the ram's horn, and you were aware of the fact that because it was a T-tail aeroplane, with the weight of the engines in the back, in other words, it was not a very good idea to go low and slow, where the aeroplane would get its tail down and couldn't get it up again. Apart from that, it was a delightful aeroplane to fly.
The original Hawker Siddeley design was for an aircraft with excellent short takeoff and landing capability, just what the industry was crying out for. But government-owned British European Airways, the main customer, had other ideas. They decided they didn't want powerful engines. They wanted tiny little engines because they operated mainly on great big long runways.
When BEA got the Trident, they got the Trident 1, which was a passport to nowhere. It had all this lovely equipment in, but it was, in fact, its affectionate name was a ground gripper. It was underpowered, and it only carried a very limited number of passengers. It had very little fuel, it didn't go very far. Jolly good for going to Paris and back. There's other places other than Paris.
To solve the problem with the lack of power, they decided to slap another engine on the tail. Yes, indeed, it had a takeoff engine in addition to the 3 engines it's got here and the auxiliary power unit. This made Trident the only 5-engined, 3-engined aeroplane in the world. But it was too late, didn't do any good. Commercial aviation had moved on. Over in Seattle, the Boeing Corporation wasn't going to be dictated to by any one government-owned customer. They had canvassed the entire American airline industry before forming the design of their next aircraft. Boeing, of course, understood that most of the runways in the world were only 5,000 feet in length, and if they could build an aeroplane that could get in and out of them with a full passenger load and full fuel, they would double the market for jet transport aeroplanes overnight. They came up with this, the Boeing 727, a T-tail and 3 engines at the back. Strikingly similar, in fact, to a Hawker Siddeley Trident. The two planes might look alike, but the Boeing had balls. Whereas the Trident had puny performance, it was like 3 hairdryers flying in close formation, the 727 didn't have any problems in that department. Boeing put the biggest engines they could possibly find and slapped them on the back. This had some serious grunt. The combination of those engines and a sleek airframe meant the 727 could cruise at well over 600 miles an hour. And it produced enough lift to stay airborne at slow speeds. Complex flaps at both the rear and front of the wing meant the 727 could land on runways the clunky 707 would have overshot.